I discovered that my mother spent $12,000 hiring a detective to follow me for 6 months and then tried to sabotage my career with lies about my mental health to force me back under her control. I received a call from the human resources manager at my company at 9:15 on a Tuesday morning that started normally, but became the day I discovered that my own mother had hired a private detective to follow me for 6 months, spending $12,000 to uncover intimate details of my private life, including where I had lunch, who I dated, and mainly documenting my every move through photographs and detailed reports that she had sent directly to my company in a desperate attempt to destroy my professional career and force me to return home. Sandra's voice from the Human Resources Department had that official and uncomfortable tone that experienced employees develop when they need to communicate delicate situations involving colleagues' personal lives invading the corporate environment. "Philippe, I need to speak with you urgently in my office. We have a quite complicated situation involving your family that could affect your position at the company," she said, carefully choosing words to avoid revealing details over the phone that could be overheard by other employees circulating through the office corridors. Her evident hesitation and worried tone made me instantly feel that something very serious had happened. Something that went beyond normal family problems that occasionally affect anyone's professional life. I walked through the familiar corridors of the technology company where I had worked for 8 years as development director, automatically greeting colleagues while my mind processed terrible possibilities about what could have motivated that urgent human resources summons on an ordinary work morning. The office had that typical atmosphere of modern companies: glass walls, minimalist decoration in gray and white tones, constant sound of keyboards being typed, and professional conversations whispered. But at that specific moment, everything seemed charged with a threatening tension that transformed the familiar environment into a scene of growing anxiety. Each step toward Sandra's office echoed on the laminate floor like a countdown to a revelation that I suspected would be devastating to my personal and professional stability. Sandra's office was at the end of the main corridor, with frosted glass walls that offered visual privacy but allowed natural light to illuminate confidential meetings about employees' sensitive issues. When I knocked on the door and entered, I found Sandra sitting behind her organized desk, with a serious expression that contrasted dramatically with her usual cordial professional smile. In front of her, spread over the table's surface like evidence of a crime, were sealed official envelopes, color photographs that I could partially see upside down, and stapled documents that looked like detailed technical reports. "Felipe, please sit down. What I'm going to show you is quite disturbing and involves your mother in a way I never imagined possible in my 15 years working with human resources issues," she said, gesturing to the chair in front of her desk. When Sandra began organizing the documents to show me their content, I felt my stomach contract in a familiar sensation of anxiety that I had developed during the last 6 months of total no contact with Helena, my 62-year-old mother who had become progressively more controlling and invasive as I built my emotional and financial independence in adult life. Yesterday we received by registered mail this package addressed directly to the company's board of directors, sent by Helena Santos, your mother, I presume, containing what appears to be a private investigation report about your personal activities over the last few months. Sandra explained, carefully opening the first envelope and revealing typewritten pages with small letters, "Hi." Resolution photographs, and mainly detailed maps with routes marked in red that documented my daily movements. The visual impact of seeing my own life documented as if I were a criminal under police investigation left me temporarily speechless. Observing in growing shock photographs that showed intimate moments of my routine that Helena had decided to transform into evidence of some accusation that I still didn't completely understand. There were images of me leaving the apartment in the morning, having lunch at specific restaurants I frequented regularly, meeting friends in coffee shops, and mainly photographs of me with Carla, my girlfriend of 2 years, walking hand in hand in public parks during weekends that should have been private moments of healthy romantic relationship. "Sandra, this is completely insane. My mother hired someone to follow me as if I were a fugitive from justice," I finally managed to articulate, picking up one of the photographs to examine more closely and recognizing the exact location where it had been taken 3 weeks earlier. "Philippe, there's more. The report includes detailed descriptions of your daily routine, specific arrival and departure times from work, establishments you frequent, people you relate to, and mainly a section that your mother classified as evidence of irresponsible behavior that she alleges justifies family intervention." Sandra continued, flipping through pages of the report with an expression of professional incredulity. The document had been elaborated with rigorous investigative methodology. Each page was numbered and dated. Photographs came accompanied by precise geographic coordinates and exact times, and mainly there were behavioral analyses written in technical language that tried to give scientific credibility to completely subjective interpretations about my personal life. Your mother sent this to our company, accompanied by a formal letter alleging that you are going through a serious psychological crisis and that she feels obligated to alert your employers about behaviors that may affect your professional performance. Helena's letter to the company's board of directors was written on official letterhead that she had specially made for that occasion, with her full name and address printed in golden letters that gave an appearance of institutional seriousness completely inappropriate for the manipulative and invasive content that followed below. Dear Director Gentlemen, I write to you as a mother concerned about the well-being of my son, Felipe Santos, an employee of this respected company for 8 years, to inform you about concerning behaviors he has been demonstrating in recent months that may compromise both his mental health and his professional performance. The letter began, immediately establishing a tone of maternal authority that tried to legitimize her interference in my professional life. After 6 months of total communication cut off with me, his loving mother, Felipe has demonstrated evident signs of emotional instability that forced me to hire a specialized professional to document his activities and confirm my suspicions about his deteriorated psychological state. As Sandra continued reading excerpts from the letter aloud, I felt alternating waves of fury and incredulity taking over my nervous system. Because Helena had managed to transform my healthy decision to establish family boundaries into a narrative of mental illness that justified her criminal invasion of my privacy. Your son has been observed frequenting suspicious establishments, maintaining questionable relationships with people of dubious reputation, and mainly demonstrating erratic behavioral patterns that include sudden routine changes, social isolation from family, and refusal to maintain communication with relatives who genuinely worry about his well-being. The letter continued, describing my normal adult life as if it were evidence of serious psychiatric disorder. Each word was carefully chosen to sound concerned and responsible, completely masking the obsessive and controlling nature of her actions. Felipe, I need to be honest with you. The content of this report is extremely invasive and some of your mother's allegations are quite serious from a corporate standpoint, Sandra said, temporarily closing the folder to give me time to process what I had just discovered. She alleges that you are involved with people of bad influence who are corrupting your judgment, that you're developing self-destructive behaviors that may affect your work, productivity, and mainly that you are being manipulated by third parties to cut contact with the family that always supported you unconditionally. The air quotes Sandra made with her fingers while citing excerpts from Helena's letter clearly demonstrated that she recognized the manipulative nature of the accusations. But as a human resources professional, she needed to officially treat any documentation that arrived about company employees. The private detective report that Helena had hired was organized in thematic sections that revealed the frightening level of detail of the investigation that had been conducted against me for months without my knowledge or consent. The first section, titled Daily Routine Patterns, meticulously documented my work schedules, routes I used to get to the office, lunch breaks with precise times, and frequented establishments, and even details about my shopping habits at specific supermarkets during weekends. Subject demonstrates rigidly structured routine that may indicate obsessive-compulsive behavior or attempt to avoid detection of questionable activities, said one of the behavioral analyses, transforming my responsible personal organization into a symptom of psychological pathology. The second section, classified as interpersonal relationships, contained photographs and detailed descriptions of all the people I had interacted with during the surveillance period, including work colleagues, personal friends, and mainly Carla, who had been identified as romantic companion of potentially negative influence on subjects' family decisions. There were photographs of us both in restaurants, movie theaters, parks, and even entering and leaving her apartment during weekends that should have been private moments of intimacy between consenting adults. The subject's girlfriend appears to exercise significant influence over his decisions to maintain family distancing, suggesting possible psychological manipulation that contributes to rejection behavior toward traditional blood ties. The report analyzed, transforming my healthy romantic relationship into a conspiracy against Helena's maternal authority. Sandra, this is criminal stalking. My mother hired someone to follow me for months, photograph intimate moments of my life, investigate people I love, and then sent all of this to my company in a deliberate attempt to harm my professional career, I said, feeling my voice tremble between indignation and incredulity at the extent of the violation of my privacy. She transformed my healthy decision to establish family boundaries into a narrative of mental illness to justify this completely criminal invasion of my adult life. The realization that Helena had spent $12,000, a significant amount for a retiree, To document insignificant details like where I had lunch revealed a level of maternal obsession that surpassed any normal concept of parental concern and clearly entered territory of systematic psychological persecution. The third section of the report, titled Concerning Behavioral Patterns, was where Helena and the detective had collaborated to interpret my normal actions as evidence of mental instability or malicious external influence. Subject demonstrates systematic avoidance of places associated with family, including neighborhoods where close relatives reside, establishments previously frequented in family company, and mainly shows signs of anxiety when questioned by acquaintances about family relationships. The document described transforming my conscious choice to avoid places that reminded me of Helena into a symptom of irrational phobia. Each of my behaviors had been analyzed through the distorted lens of a mother who refused to accept that I had grown and developed sufficient emotional autonomy to question toxic relationships, even when they involved biological family. Felipe, although the content of this report is obviously biased and represents a serious violation of your privacy, I need to inform you that the board of directors has requested a formal meeting to discuss the allegations presented by your mother, Sandra continued, revealing the corporate dimension of Helena's strategy to force me to re-establish contact. Obviously, we don't believe her interpretations about your professional behavior, which has been exemplary during all the years you've worked with us. But corporate protocols require that we formally investigate any allegation about employees' mental health that could affect the work environment or business productivity. Her words confirmed my worst fears about Helena's intentions. She had strategically calculated that attacking my professional reputation would be the most effective way to pressure me to accept her toxic presence in my life again. The most disturbing aspect of that entire revelation wasn't even the privacy violation or the attempt to harm my career, but the growing perception that Helena had transformed our maternal relationship into a psychological battlefield where she would use any available method to maintain control over my adult life, regardless of the emotional or professional damage it could cause. Sandra, my mother, cut contact with me 6 months ago, not because I abandoned her, but because I established healthy boundaries about her obsessive interference in my personal life, romantic relationships, professional decisions, and mainly because I refused to accept that she continued treating a 38-year-old man like a child incapable of making responsible decisions. I explained, trying to contextualize the situation so she would understand that I was a victim of family persecution, not a rebellious son rejecting legitimate maternal care. When Sandra showed me the fourth and final section of the report, titled Recommendations for Family Intervention, I felt as if I were reading the operations manual of a cult that had decided to forcibly recruit me back to their ranks, through methods that mixed emotional blackmail with systematic psychological intimidation. Coordinated intervention between family and employers is recommended to create environmental pressures that motivate the subject to seek professional help and mainly to recognize the importance of traditional family ties for his emotional stability and professional success. The document suggested, explicitly proposing a conspiracy between Helena and my company to force me to accept a relationship that I had consciously rejected for being psychologically destructive. The recommendations included continuous monitoring of my activities, regular communication between Helena and my superiors about my emotional progress, and mainly limitation of negative external influences. Code obviously directed at my relationship with Carla. Felipe, I want you to know that regardless of corporate pressures, my personal opinion is that your mother crossed all possible ethical lines by hiring private investigation about an adult son and then trying to use this information to harm your professional life, Sandra said, demonstrating the type of genuine human support that contrasted dramatically with Helena's calculated coldness. As a mother of 2 adult children, I can categorically state that healthy maternal behavior never includes persecution, privacy, invasion, or attempts at professional sabotage, regardless of any legitimate concerns she might have about her children's life choices. Her words offered emotional validation that I desperately needed to hear from an authority figure, confirming that my perception about the toxicity of Helena's behavior was correct and that I wasn't an ungrateful son rejecting appropriate maternal care. Leaving Sandra's office that transformative morning, I carried with me not only documentation of the criminal invasion of my privacy, but mainly definitive confirmation that my decision to cut contact with Helena had been not only appropriate, but absolutely necessary to protect my mental sanity and professional stability against a person who had demonstrated willingness to use any method to maintain control over my adult life. The clandestine photographs, pseudoscientific reports, and mainly the calculated attempt to harm my career revealed the frightening level of maternal obsession that had characterized our dysfunctional family relationship for years, but that I had finally found the courage to confront by establishing definitive boundaries that she clearly refused to respect. Sandra's call to the board of directors ended abruptly after 35 minutes of tense conversation. But the psychological damage had already been completely consummated through calculated insinuations about my supposed mental instability, veiled suggestions about self-destructive behaviors I supposedly demonstrated, and mainly through explicit recommendations for my superiors to carefully monitor my professional performance, looking for signs of deterioration that could justify corporate intervention coordinated with family pressures. During the days following the discovery of Helena's report, each interaction at the office transformed into a paranoid experience where I obsessively analyzed colleagues' facial expressions, looking for signs that they had been contaminated by the distorted narratives that my mother had strategically planted in the minds of executives responsible for decisions about my professional career. The corporate environment, I knew, had become an emotional minefield where each casual conversation could be a disguised attempt to assess my psychological state based on the criminal allegations Helena had made against me. Roberto, my best friend since university days and now a clinical psychologist specializing in dysfunctional family relationships. It became my anchor of sanity during the chaotic period that followed the revelation of the systematic maternal persecution I had suffered for 6 months without any knowledge or consent. When I called him on the night I discovered Helena's report, my voice was trembling so much that he initially thought I was suffering some kind of acute nervous breakdown. But I gradually managed to articulate the astoundingly invasive details of the private investigation that my own mother had orchestrated against me as if I were a dangerous criminal fleeing from justice. Philippe, what you're describing isn't normal maternal behavior, even considering the most extreme standards of parental concern. This is systematic psychological persecution executed by someone who has completely lost the notion of appropriate boundaries between legitimate control and criminal invasion of others' privacy, Roberto said, using his professional experience to clinically contextualize the situation I was facing. During our phone conversation that extended for more than 2 hours, Roberto explained in detail how individuals with controlling personality disorders frequently escalate their manipulation tactics when they perceive they're losing influence over people. They consider extensions of themselves instead of independent human beings. With the right to emotional autonomy and personal decisions, Helena clearly cannot accept that you've become an adult capable of establishing healthy boundaries about excessive family interference. So she escalated 2 methods that mix criminal persecution with emotional blackmail disguised as maternal concern. He analyzed, offering psychological perspective that helped me understand that I wasn't dealing with an overprotective mother, but with a person who had developed pathological obsession with control over my adult life. The most disturbing discovery within the report, elaborated by Marcos, the private detective hired by Helena, was a section titled, Analysis of Subjects' Psychological Vulnerabilities that demonstrated how they had collaborated to identify specific aspects of my personality that could be exploited to force me to accept Helena's toxic presence in my life again. The document meticulously listed my work routines, exercise schedules, food preferences, social relationships, and mainly behavioral patterns they interpreted as evidence of progressive social isolation or emotional instability that would justify forced family intervention. Subject demonstrates evident signs of social anxiety by avoiding family events, preferring to spend time with a limited social circle that may be reinforcing his decision to maintain distance from relatives who genuinely worry about his well-being, said one of the analyses, transforming my healthy choice to prioritize authentic friendships over toxic family obligations into a symptom of mental pathology. Carla, my girlfriend of 2 years, an attorney specializing in family law, was absolutely outraged when I showed her the sections of the report that specifically referred to our romantic relationship as negative influence that was corrupting my judgment about traditional family loyalties. Helena and the detective had photographically documented our private romantic activities, interpreting our walks in parks, dinners and restaurants, and mainly our decision to spend weekends together as evidence that Carla was psychologically manipulating me to reject legitimate maternal authority. Philippe, this isn't just privacy invasion, but also character defamation directed against me as a way to pressure you to end our healthy relationship to return to your mother's toxic control, Carla said, legally analyzing the legal implications of Helena's actions. She's trying to systematically destroy all positive aspects of your adult life to create an emotional vacuum that only she could fill. During the days following the report's discovery, I began to perceive disturbing signs that Helena hadn't limited her persecution activities just to hiring a private detective, but had expanded her tactics to include attempts to manipulate people in my social circle through phone calls where she presented herself as a concerned mother seeking information about my emotional state and mainly about influences that were distancing me from family. Work colleagues casually mentioned having received calls from a woman who identified herself as my mother, asking about my behavior at the office, if I seemed stressed or unhappy, and mainly if they had noticed changes in my personality that could indicate serious personal problems. Your mother called me yesterday asking if you've been acting strange lately. She said she was worried because you two haven't spoken in months and she wants to make sure you're okay, a colleague reported. Not realizing he was being used as a surveillance tool in an elaborate persecution campaign, Helena's strategy was obviously to create a network of involuntary informants who would monitor my behavior and report any sign of emotional vulnerability that she could exploit to justify forced maternal intervention. She had called friends, colleagues, neighbors, and even commercial establishments I frequented, always using the same script of loving mother worried about a son who had isolated himself from family due to malicious external influences. My son was always very close to me, but lately he's cut all contact, and I'm worried that someone is influencing him negatively. If you notice anything strange in his behavior, please call me because I want to help him, she would say, transforming well-meaning people into unpaid spies who unconsciously contributed to her systematic persecution campaign. The most sinister aspect of this entire surveillance operation was how Helena had managed to obtain detailed information about my daily routine, including specific arrival and departure times from work. Routes I used to drive to the office, restaurants where I regularly had lunch, the gym where I exercised, and mainly details about my relationship with Carla that only someone with access to very intimate information could know. During a tense phone conversation I finally managed to have with Helena after 6 months of total silence. She inadvertently revealed that she had gained access to my social media accounts through old passwords I had shared with her years ago, when our relationship was apparently healthy and I trusted her completely. Dear son, I just wanted to make sure you were well and happy. So sometimes I checked your photos and posts to feel like I was still part of your life, somehow, she confessed. Admitting systematic violation of my digital privacy, as if it were a demonstration of maternal love instead of a privacy invasion crime, the revelation that Helena had been secretly monitoring my online activities for months added a digital dimension to the persecution. I was already suffering in the physical world, creating a claustrophobic sensation that no aspect of my private life was safe from her obsessive surveillance. She had taken screenshots of private conversations with friends, saved photographs I posted with Carla, and mainly had used information obtained through this digital espionage to instruct the private detective about where and when to find me to photographically document my daily activities. Helena, what you did isn't maternal love. It's a crime of stalking and privacy invasion that could result in a lawsuit and a restraining order that would legally prohibit you from approaching me, I said during our phone confrontation, trying to make her understand the legal gravity of her actions. But she responded with the same victimization script she had used for years to justify progressively more invasive and controlling behaviors. Roberto explained to me during one of our psychological support sessions that individuals with narcissistic personality disorders frequently interpret healthy boundaries established by other people as personal attacks that justify escalation of control tactics, including persecution, character defamation, and mainly attempts to destroy relationships that the narcissistic person perceives as threats to their authority over the victim. Helena cannot accept that you have the right to privacy, emotional autonomy, or relationships that aren't approved by her. So she escalated 2 criminal methods disguised as maternal concern to force you back to the toxic control she previously exercised. He analyzed, confirming that I was dealing with a person who had completely lost the ability to distinguish between genuine love and obsessive possession. During the weeks following the discovery of the systematic persecution orchestrated by Helena, I developed physical stress symptoms that included chronic insomnia, loss of appetite, and mainly spontaneous anxiety attacks that occurred when I perceived I was being observed or followed in public places. The paranoia resulting from discovering I had been watched for 6 months without knowledge created constant hypervigilance that transformed simple activities like going to the supermarket or having lunch at a restaurant into emotionally exhausting experiences where I obsessively analyzed every person around me looking for signs they could be another investigator hired by Helena. Felipe, you need to understand that you've developed symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder resulting from systematic persecution, and these symptoms are normal reactions to serious violations of your personal safety and privacy, Roberto explained. Clinically contextualizing the psychological difficulties I was experiencing as natural consequences of being treated as a target of criminal investigation by my own mother, Carla suggested we seek specialized legal guidance about legal measures that could be taken against Helena for stalking, privacy invasion, and mainly for character defamation through false allegations she had made about my mental health to my company and social circle. Felipe, what your mother did constitutes serious crimes that include systematic stalking, privacy invasion, misuse of personal information, and mainly attempted professional sabotage through false allegations about your mental competence, Carla said. Using her legal experience to catalog the legal violations committed by Helena, we need to meticulously document all evidence of this persecution and mainly consult with an attorney, specializing in restraining orders to ensure she cannot continue criminally interfering in your adult life. Dr. Patricia, a psychiatrist specializing in personality disorders that Roberto recommended to clinically evaluate the dysfunctional family situation I was facing, confirmed during our initial consultation that Helena's behavior clearly fit patterns of obsessive persecution, characteristic of severe narcissistic disorders combined with possible delusional disorder that distorted her perception about appropriate boundaries between mothers and adult children. Your mother demonstrates pathological inability to accept that you possess emotional autonomy and right to privacy, interpreting your healthy independence as personal rejection that justifies escalation to control methods that include criminal persecution and relationship sabotage. Dr. Patricia offering professional diagnosis that confirmed my perception that I was dealing with a psychologically disturbed person instead of an overprotective mother with legitimate concerns. During our psychological evaluation session, Dr. Patricia explained that individuals with personality disorders frequently use social institutions like the judicial system, employers, and even family circles as weapons to pressure their victims to accept toxic relationships that violate healthy personal boundaries. Helena uses institutional manipulation strategies by sending false reports to your company, making mental instability allegations that could affect your career, and mainly by trying to recruit people from your social circle as involuntary informants who monitor your behavior, she observed, clinically contextualizing the tactics Helena had employed as manifestations of severe personality disorder that required legal intervention instead of traditional family reconciliation. The psychological report, elaborated by Dr. Patricia after 3 evaluation sessions, included specific recommendations for me to seek a judicial restraining order against Helena because her escalation to criminal persecution indicated high risk that she would continue intensifying her control tactics until she managed to force my return to the toxic relationship I had consciously rejected for being psychologically destructive. Patient demonstrates clear signs of stress disorder resulting from systematic family persecution, including hypervigilance, chronic anxiety, and mainly deterioration of quality of life, caused by constant violations of personal privacy and sabotage of healthy relationships. Dr. Patricia wrote in the report that would become crucial evidence for the lawsuit I was considering initiating against my own mother to protect my mental sanity and professional stability. The decision to seek legal restraining order against Helena was made on a particularly difficult afternoon when I discovered she had called directly to my company's Human Resources Department, not just to Sandra, but also to other executives, trying to schedule an in-person meeting where she could present additional evidence about my son's psychological deterioration that requires coordinated intervention between family and employers. Sandra informed me about this attempt during an embarrassing conversation where she needed to officially warn me that Helena was intensifying her attempts to harm my professional reputation through increasingly elaborate allegations about my supposed mental instability. Philippe, your mother is clearly escalating her tactics, and we need to take formal measures to protect both you and the company from legal consequences of being involved in this dysfunctional family situation, Sandra said, demonstrating genuine concern for both my well-being and the corporate implications of having an employee being systematically persecuted by a family member with personality disorder. That night, after another threatening call from Helena where she explicitly declared that a mother never gives up saving a son, even if it means using all available resources to prove he needs professional help, I called Carla and announced my decision to seek legal guidance about a restraining order that would legally prohibit Helena from approaching me, contacting my workplace, or interfering in any way with my personal and professional life. Philippe, this decision demonstrates that you finally understood you're not dealing with an overprotective mother, but with a person who represents a real threat to your psychological safety and professional stability, Carla said, offering emotional support while we planned the legal strategy that would definitively protect me against the persecution campaign that had become progressively more invasive and destructive during recent months. The consultation with the attorney specializing in restraining orders and family law revealed that the case I was presenting had exceptionally solid documentary evidence to support a request for comprehensive restriction order that would include prohibition of direct or indirect contact, monitoring of professional activities, interference in personal relationships, and mainly access to information about my location or daily routine. Mr. Felipe, the private investigation report your mother hired constitutes irrefutable evidence of systematic persecution, and the calls to your company demonstrate deliberate attempt at professional sabotage that justifies comprehensive restraining order, the attorney explained. confirming that I had solid legal grounds to obtain judicial protection against Helena without needing to prove physical harm or explicit threats of violence. The process of obtaining judicial restraining order against Helena required me to meticulously compile all evidence of systematic persecution I had suffered for months, transforming my traumatic experience into cold but necessary legal documentation that would demonstrate to the court the frightening extent of criminal invasion of my privacy perpetrated by my own mother. During 3 intensive weeks, I worked with Carla to chronologically organize each intercepted call, each clandestine photograph, each pseudoscientific report, and mainly each attempt by Helena to manipulate my professional environment through false allegations about my mental stability that could have permanently destroyed my reputation in the technology sector where I had built my career for almost a decade. The legal file that resulted from this collaborative effort contained more than 200 pages of evidence documenting not only specific violations of my privacy, but mainly a systematic pattern of escalation of controlling tactics that revealed the pathological nature of Helena's obsession with maintaining absolute dominion over my adult life, regardless of legal or emotional consequences. During this period of intensive legal preparation, Helena dramatically intensified her attempts to contact me through increasingly invasive and disturbing methods that included physically appearing at my apartment building during specific hours when she knew I would be arriving or leaving from work. Based on detailed information she had collected through the private detective she had hired to follow me for months, the building doorman reported multiple incidents where a middle-aged woman presented herself as my concerned mother, trying to convince them to allow access to the building, or at least to confirm my movement schedules so she could talk with my son about urgent family matters requiring immediate attention. Your mother was here again yesterday, asking if you were okay, and saying you two had a fight and she just wants to reconcile, one of the doormen informed them, not realizing he was being manipulated to provide information about my routine that Helena would use to plan future forced encounters. Helena's physical attempts to personally intercept me created an additional dimension of anxiety in my daily life because I never knew when I might find her waiting in the building parking lot, in the building lobby, or even near my workplace where she had begun appearing during lunch hours hoping to force me into a public confrontation I couldn't avoid without creating embarrassing scenes in front of professional colleagues. During one of these emotional ambushes, Helena approached me in the company parking lot when I was leaving for lunch, literally blocking my path to the car while crying dramatically and declaring that I was destroying a mother who sacrificed her entire life to raise an ungrateful son who now treats her like a criminal for demonstrating genuine maternal love. Her theatrical performance attracted the attention of other employees observing from a distance, creating exactly the type of professional embarrassment she had strategically calculated to pressure me to yield to her reconciliation demands. Roberto explained to me during one of our psychological support sessions that individuals with controlling personality disorders frequently escalate to public confrontations when subtler manipulation methods fail, because they know most people feel uncomfortable with dramatic displays of emotion in professional environments, and will yield to unreasonable demands to avoid social embarrassment. Helena is using public emotional blackmail tactics deliberately calculated to exploit your natural concern with professional appearances and force you to accept interactions you consciously rejected for being psychologically destructive, he analyzed, offering clinical perspective that helped me understand that yielding to Helena's demands during these public confrontations would only reinforce her obsessive behavior and encourage even more invasive and destructive future escalations. Carla suggested we carefully document each attempt by Helena to physically confront me through discrete photographs, audio recordings when legally permitted, and mainly through independent witnesses like doormen, security guards, and work colleagues who could confirm the persecution pattern that was intensifying as the court hearing date approached. Felipe, each unsolicited appearance by Helena at your workplace or residence constitutes additional violation of the boundaries you legally established, and we need to meticulously document this behavior to demonstrate to the court that she represents a continuing threat to your peace and professional stability. Carla explained, using her legal experience to transform each traumatic incident into legal evidence that would strengthen our case for obtaining comprehensive restraining order. During this period of Helena's tactical escalation, I received disturbing information that she had expanded her defamation campaign to include direct contacts with important clients of my company, presenting herself as the concerned mother of an employee who was going through a serious personal crisis that could affect projects in development. 2 clients casually mentioned during business meetings that they had received calls from a woman claiming to be my mother, expressing concerns about my emotional stability and suggesting the company should carefully monitor my work to ensure quality of deliverables. Philippe, someone who identified herself as your mother, called me last week saying you've been going through difficult times and she wanted to make sure this wouldn't affect our project. I thought it was strange, but I thought it was normal family concern. A client commented during a video conference, inadvertently revealing another dimension of systematic professional sabotage that Helena was orchestrating. The revelation that Helena had directly contacted company clients represented dangerous escalation that threatened not only my personal reputation, but potentially significant financial contracts that sustained important projects where I was the responsible technical leader. Sandra called an emergency meeting with the board of directors to discuss corporate implications of the dysfunctional family situation that was dangerously infiltrating the business environment, transforming a personal problem into a professional crisis that could affect multiple employees and commercial relationships established over years of competent work. Philippe, although we have absolute confidence in your professional integrity and technical competence, we need to take formal measures to protect our company from consequences of having an unstable family situation affecting relationships with important clients, Sandra said during the tense meeting where executives discussed protocols for dealing with future attempts by Helena to interfere with commercial operations. The company's board of directors decided to implement a specific security protocol that included instructions for all customers' service department employees to be trained to identify and appropriately redirect any calls from Helena. Plus, security alerts for corporate building doormen about an unauthorized person who might try to access facilities by falsely presenting herself as an employee's family member. We're taking these measures not because we doubt you, but because we need to protect both your well-being and the integrity of our commercial processes against malicious external interference. The general director explained, demonstrating institutional support that contrasted dramatically with Helena's attempts to portray my company as an involuntary accomplice in my supposed psychological deterioration. Marcos, the private detective Helena had originally hired to follow me, reappeared in my life completely unexpectedly when he contacted me directly through phone call to reveal disturbing information about specific instructions he had received from Helena and mainly about additional tactics she was planning to implement in case her current attempts to force reconciliation continued being unsuccessful. Mr. Philippe, I need to inform you that your mother contacted me again requesting additional services that include investigation about your girlfriend, your close friends, and mainly about ways to pressure these people to convince you to re-establish family relationship, Marcos said during our tense phone conversation, revealing that Helena had decided to expand her persecution campaign to actively include people I loved as targets of secondary psychological manipulation. The revelation that Helena was planning to investigate and potentially harass Carla, Roberto, and other close friends transformed an already traumatic situation into a crisis that threatened not only my own emotional safety, but also the well-being of innocent people who had become targets of pathological maternal obsession simply for demonstrating loyalty and support during my recovery period from family trauma. Mr. Felipe, I decided to contact you because your mother's requests crossed ethical lines I cannot professionally accept. And mainly because I realized she's not operating with rational discernment but demonstrating signs of obsessive behavior that could result in harm to multiple people, Marcos explained, demonstrating professional integrity that contrasted with the criminal nature of the requests Helena was making. During our revealing conversation, Marcos confessed he had initially accepted Helena's contract because her initial concerns about my well-being seemed like legitimate maternal concerns, but gradually realized he was being used as a tool in a systematic persecution campaign directed against an adult son who had established healthy boundaries about toxic family interference. When your mother originally hired me, she presented the situation as concern about a son who had isolated himself from family and might be in danger. But as the work progressed, it became clear she was using my investigations to violate your privacy and mainly to collect information that could be used to sabotage your independent adult life, he admitted, offering insider perspective on how Helena had manipulated an experienced professional to participate unwittingly in a psychological abuse campaign. Marcos offered to formally testify in favor of my restraining order request, providing specialized testimony about specific instructions he had received from Helena and mainly about his professional observation that her behavior demonstrated patterns characteristic of obsessive stalking instead of legitimate maternal concern. Based on my experience as an investigator and former police officer, I can categorically state that the instructions I received from Mrs. Helena Santos constitute solicitation of services for systematic criminal persecution, and mainly that her behavior demonstrates escalation patterns typical of individuals with controlling personality disorders who represent danger to the well-being of their victims, he wrote in the formal statement that would become crucial evidence for my legal case against Helena. The court hearing scheduled for a cold Thursday morning represented the culmination of months of meticulous documentation, intense psychological preparation, and mainly the materialization of my definitive decision to use the Brazilian legal system to protect myself against a mother who had transformed maternal love into criminal obsession that threatened to destroy all healthy aspects of my adult life built through years of hard work and conscious emotional growth. The family court located in the city center had that solemn atmosphere characteristic of judicial institutions, with marble floors that echoed our nervous steps, dark wood panels that conferred gravity to legal proceedings, and mainly rigid benches where destroyed families awaited official resolutions for conflicts that should have been resolved through healthy communication but had escalated to proportions requiring formal state intervention. Carla held my hand firmly while we awaited our turn to present evidence that would prove before judicial authorities that Helena Santos, my 62-year-old biological mother, had become a legal threat to my personal safety and professional stability through systematic persecution campaigns that violated multiple federal laws about privacy and harassment. When the clerk announced our case and we were called to present ourselves before the magistrate responsible for evaluating our restraining order request, I felt a complex mixture of justified nervousness and anticipated relief, because I would finally have opportunity to present to an impartial authority the devastating evidence of persecution I had suffered for 8 consecutive months at the hands of a person who should represent security and unconditional support in my life, Judge Dr. Marina Fernandes. A woman of approximately 50 years, with graying hair pulled back in an austere bun, an expression that combined professional severity with genuine human compassion, listened attentively to our initial presentation, where Carla, functioning as my legal representative, chronologically outlined the evolution of Helena's invasive tactics from initial attempts at emotional manipulation to escalation to documented criminal persecution that included hiring private detective, digital privacy violation, and deliberate sabotage of my professional reputation. Your Honor, we present irrefutable evidence that defendant Helena Santos conducted systematic persecution campaign against her adult son Felipe Santos, utilizing methods that configure multiple violations of federal laws about privacy, harassment, and mainly character defamation through false allegations about plaintiff's mental stability, Carla declared, immediately establishing the formal legal tone necessary to transform my personal trauma into solid judicial case. The presentation of physical evidence to the magistrate created a surreal moment where my violated private life was being clinically examined by judicial officials who needed to objectively evaluate the extent of criminal invasion perpetrated by Helena during months of unauthorized surveillance. The clandestine photographs documenting intimate moments of mine and Carlos were organized chronologically on the judge's table, creating a disturbing visual timeline of maternal obsession that had gradually escalated from invasive curiosity to systematic professional persecution. The 200-page report, elaborated by the private detective hired by Helena, was methodically leafed through by Dr. Fernand, who occasionally raised her eyebrows in expressions of growing incredulity as she discovered increasingly invasive details of investigation that had been conducted against me, as if I were a dangerous criminal fleeing federal justice. This level of detail about daily activities of an ordinary citizen exceeds any reasonable standard of parental concern and clearly configures obsessive persecution that justifies judicial intervention to protect the victim. The magistrate commented, offering official validation that confirmed my perception that Helena had crossed all possible legal and ethical lines. The testimony of Marcos, the private detective Helena had originally hired to follow me, provided crucial professional perspective that demonstrated how an obsessive mother had manipulated an experienced investigator to participate unwittingly in a psychological abuse campaign disguised as legitimate maternal concern. Your Honor, I accept responsibility for having initially contributed to this privacy violation, but I must testify that the instructions I received from Mrs. Helena Santos escalated progressively beyond any ethical standard acceptable in the private investigation profession, Marcos declared during his formal testimony, explaining in detail how Helena had initially presented her concerns as legitimate maternal concerns but gradually revealed controlling motivations that exceeded legal boundaries. His specialized testimony included technical analyses about photographs that had been taken, surveillance methods that had been employed, and mainly revelations about specific instructions Helena had given to expand the investigation to include friends, colleagues, and mainly Carla as secondary persecution targets designed to isolate me socially until I yielded to forced reconciliation demands. The defense presented by Helena through her private attorney tried to portray her actions as manifestations of legitimate maternal love directed at an adult son who had developed concerning behaviors justifying responsible family intervention. But this defensive narrative quickly collapsed before overwhelming evidence, demonstrating systematic pattern of escalation of controlling tactics culminating in documented criminal persecution. Your Honor, my client is a devoted mother who genuinely worries about her only son's well-being, and her actions, although perhaps excessive, were motivated by unconditional love and mainly by evident signs that Philippe was being negatively influenced by people who encouraged him to cut healthy family ties. Helena's attorney argued, trying to transform criminal persecution into misdirected but fundamentally benevolent parental concern. However, the magistrate interrupted this line of argument, requesting that the defense specifically explain how hiring private detective, violating social media accounts, and attempting professional sabotage could be characterized as appropriate manifestations of maternal love in civilized society that respects autonomy of independent adults. During Helena's direct interrogation by the magistrate, I witnessed a disturbing theatrical performance where my mother alternated between manipulative, tears, and indignant declarations about her supposed victimization by an ungrateful son who had rejected loving family in favor of malicious external influences that corrupted his judgment about traditional family loyalties. Your Honor, I am a mother who sacrificed her entire life to raise a son who now treats me like a criminal simply for demonstrating natural concern about questionable choices he has made since getting involved with people who clearly don't have his best interests in mind, Helena declared, using the same victimization script she had employed for months to justify progressive escalation of controlling tactics. Her performance included dramatic gestures calculated to evoke judicial sympathy, strategically timed crying to interrupt inconvenient questioning, and mainly repeated allegations that she was victim of coordinated conspiracy between me, Carla, and my friends to destroy united family through unnecessary legal measures that criminalize genuine maternal love. Magistrate Dr. Fernandez demonstrated impressive judicial discernment by not allowing herself to be manipulated by Helena's emotional tactics, systematically focusing on documented facts instead of allowing emotional appeals to distort her objective analysis of presented evidence. Mrs. Helena, I understand you may have legitimate concerns about your son, but this court needs to determine whether your specific actions violated established laws about privacy and harassment, regardless of your personal motivations, the judge declared, establishing clear boundaries that would prevent Helena from transforming legal proceedings into theatrical performance designed to avoid accountability for documented criminal behavior. When directly questioned about legal authorization to hire private investigation about adult citizen, Helena was forced to admit she hadn't obtained any consent or legal justification for systematic surveillance she had conducted, revealing her actions constituted unambiguous violation of multiple federal privacy laws regardless of her claimed maternal motivations. The most impactful moment of the judicial hearing occurred when the magistrate read aloud specific excerpts from the report elaborated by the private detective, highlighting particularly invasive language that documented intimate details about my personal life that no mother should know about an adult son living independently. The document describes specific schedules of intimacy between plaintiff and his companion, behavioral analyses about their social interactions, and mainly recommendations about psychological pressure methods that could be employed to force him to accept family relationship. He consciously rejected, Dr. Fernandez read, creating official record of the frightening extent of privacy invasion Helena had orchestrated. The public reading of these excerpts in formal judicial environment transformed my personal humiliation into irrefutable legal evidence demonstrating how Helena had violated not only my privacy, but mainly my human dignity by treating me as subject of criminal investigation instead of son with right to adult autonomy. The testimony of Dr. Patricia, the psychiatrist, specializing in personality disorders who had clinically evaluated my family situation, provided crucial professional expertise that contextualized Helena's behavior within established clinical frameworks for identifying and treating obsessive control disorders that manifest through stalking and harassment of family members. Based on my evaluation of patient Philippe Santos and analysis of evidence presented about Mrs. Helena Santos' behavior, I can clinically state that we observe characteristic pattern of narcissistic personality disorder combined with elements of obsessive, compulsive disorder that manifests through pathological inability to accept autonomy of adult offspring, Dr. Patricia testified, offering professional diagnosis that legitimized my decision to seek legal protective measures instead of trying to resolve through traditional family therapy that would be inappropriate for addressing criminal stalking behavior. Her testimony included specific recommendations for Helena to seek mandatory psychiatric treatment as condition for any future supervised contact with me, acknowledging that individuals with her behavioral patterns represent ongoing risk to well-being of family members who establish healthy boundaries. Sandra, officially representing my technology company, testified about corporate impact of Helena's attempts to sabotage my professional reputation through unauthorized communications with clients and executives that could have resulted in termination or significant career damage based on false mental health allegations she had systematically disseminated. Mrs. Helena Santos's interference in our commercial operations through unauthorized contacts with important clients created an unsustainable situation that threatened not only Mr. Felipe's reputation, but also established commercial relationships that sustained multiple employment positions within our organization, Sandra testified, demonstrating that Helena's actions had expanded beyond personal harassment to create business liability that affected innocent third parties, including my colleagues who depended on stability of contracts she had attempted to undermine. Her professional testimony confirmed that Helena had crossed boundary between personal, family, dispute, and criminal corporate sabotage that justified urgent legal intervention to protect not only my well-being, but also livelihoods of multiple people within my professional network. Carla concluded our legal presentation with passionate argument that synthesized all presented evidence into coherent narrative, demonstrating how Helena had transformed maternal love into criminal obsession that threatened to destroy all positive aspects of my adult life that I had carefully constructed through years of responsible decision-making and emotional growth. Your Honor, overwhelming evidence demonstrates that Helena Santos conducted systematic criminal harassment campaign against her adult son, Felipe Santos, utilizing methods that violate multiple federal laws and mainly that demonstrate ongoing escalation pattern that represents clear and present danger to plaintiff's psychological safety and professional stability, Carla argued. Establishing legal foundation for comprehensive restraining order that would protect not only me, but also people I loved from future predatory behavior by Helena. Her argument included specific requests for prohibitions against direct or indirect contact, surveillance activities, interference with professional responsibilities, and mainly access to information about my location or daily routines that Helena had demonstrated willingness to exploit through criminal means. The judicial decision pronounced by Magistrate Dr. Fernandez after brief but thorough deliberation constituted complete validation of my experience as victim of family abuse disguised as maternal concern, establishing legal precedent that protected my right to adult autonomy against intrusive family members who crossed boundaries between legitimate worry and criminal persecution. Based on overwhelming evidence presented, this court determines that Helena Santos conducted systematic harassment campaign against Felipe Santos that violates multiple federal laws about privacy and stalking, justifying immediate implementation of comprehensive protective order that prohibits any form of direct or indirect contact between involved parties. The magistrate declared, reading comprehensive list of prohibitions that effectively created impenetrable legal barrier between me and Helena that would be enforced through criminal penalties if violated. The restraining order included specific provisions against surveillance activities, professional interference, contact with my associates, and mainly access to any information about my life that could facilitate future harassment attempts. In the days immediately following judicial decision, I experienced profound psychological relief that accompanied official recognition that my perception of Helena as legitimate threat to my well-being had been validated by impartial authority who possessed expertise to distinguish between legitimate family concern and criminal obsession, masquerading as maternal love. The restraining order created psychological safety zone that allowed me to function normally without constant fear of unexpected confrontations, professional sabotage, or privacy violations that had dominated my existence during months of systematic persecution. Roberto helped me process complex emotions that accompanied legal victory that simultaneously represented necessary protection and devastating acknowledgement that biological mother had become legal threat requiring state intervention to ensure my basic safety and dignity as adult citizen with fundamental rights to privacy and autonomous decision-making. During weeks that followed court decision, Helena made several attempts to contact me indirectly through letters delivered to my office, emails sent from multiple accounts, and mainly through well-meaning intermediaries she recruited to carry messages about her supposed rehabilitation and desire to rebuild damaged relationship. Each violation of the restraining order was meticulously documented and reported to appropriate authorities, resulting in progressive financial fines and official warnings that future violations could result in more serious criminal charges, including imprisonment for contempt of court. The consistency of my response to these attempted violations, systematically documenting, but never responding directly, demonstrated to Helena that legal boundaries established by court would be rigorously enforced and that her previous ability to manipulate me through emotional appeals had been permanently terminated through decisive legal intervention. Carla and I decided to strengthen our relationship by moving together into a new apartment that Helena had never visited, creating physical space free from traumatic associations that connected me to years of emotional manipulation and excessive control. The apartment hunting process became therapeutic exercise that allowed us to envision future built upon foundation of mutual respect, healthy communication, and mainly freedom from external interference that had characterized our relationship during difficult period when Helena had attempted to destroy authentic bonds through systematic persecution. Our new home represented not only practical measure to ensure enhanced privacy, but mainly symbolic declaration that toxic family patterns would not be allowed to contaminate healthy relationship we worked hard to build based upon shared values and genuine emotional compatibility. Professional therapy with Dr. Patricia helped me develop specific coping strategies for dealing with long-term psychological effects of family abuse, disguised as maternal care, including techniques for managing anxiety related to potential future contact attempts, methods for maintaining healthy boundaries with other family members who might pressure me for inappropriate reconciliation, and mainly cognitive frameworks for processing complex trauma resulting from having biological mother transform into legal threat, requiring judicial intervention. During regular therapy sessions, we explored familial patterns that preceded escalation to criminal behavior, identifying early warning signs I had missed due to societal expectations about unconditional family loyalty that prevented me from recognizing psychological abuse when perpetrated by a maternal figure who exploited cultural assumptions about righteous maternal concern. Roberto continued, providing psychological support throughout transition period as I adapted to life without constant threat of maternal persecution, helping me rebuild confidence in my judgment about healthy relationships and particularly in my ability to maintain appropriate boundaries without excessive guilt about cutting contact with toxic family members regardless of biological connections. His professional guidance was crucial in helping me understand that cutting contact with Helena didn't represent personal failure or cruel abandonment, but rather necessary self-preservation measure that protected not only my psychological well-being, but also stability of positive relationships I had formed with people who respected my autonomy and treated me as individual, worthy of basic dignity. Through regular therapy sessions, I learned to recognize fundamental difference between genuine concern and manipulative control, developing skills for identifying similar patterns in future relationships and mainly building emotional resilience that would protect me against future attempts at psychological manipulation by anyone who attempted to exploit cultural expectations about family obligations. Marcos contacted me several months after court decision to inform that Helena had attempted to recruit other private investigators to continue surveillance activities, but multiple agencies refused to accept her case after he reported it to Professional Association as example of client who solicited potentially criminal services that could expose investigators to legal liability under federal stalking laws. His decision to testify against Helena, despite potential damage to his professional reputation, demonstrated rare integrity that helped expose dangerous pattern of family abuse that frequently remains hidden because victims fear challenging parental authority even when that authority manifests through systematic criminal behavior. His testimony also established legal precedent that private investigators have ethical obligation to refuse cases involving unauthorized surveillance of adult citizens requested by family members claiming legitimate concern, but demonstrating behavioral patterns suggesting harassment rather than legitimate protective investigation. During year that followed judicial decision, maintaining strict adherence to restraining order requirements proved effective in gradually reducing Helena's attempts to reinitiate contact, as financial legal consequences and potential criminal charges create a deterrent effect strong enough to overcome her obsessive need to control my adult life through criminal methods. Occasional violation attempts became progressively less frequent as Helena apparently recognized that Brazilian legal system would consistently enforce protective measures and that her previous ability to manipulate through emotional appeals had been permanently neutralized through decisive judicial intervention. The restraining order also protected Carla, Roberto, and other friends who had been targeted for secondary harassment as part of Helena's strategy to socially isolate me until I surrendered to her demands. For toxic relationship I had wisely rejected. Professional consequences of Helena's interference in my career gradually resolved as corporate leadership recognized that her false allegations had been motivated by family dysfunction rather than legitimate concerns about my performance or mental health. Sandra worked diligently to repair damaged relationships with clients who had been inappropriately contacted by Helena, providing professional explanations about complex family situation that had required legal intervention to protect company operations from malicious external interference. My professional reputation gradually recovered through continued high-quality work performance that clearly demonstrated Helena's allegations had been unfounded, character assassination rather than legitimate concerns about workplace competency. The experience also strengthened relationships with colleagues who witnessed supportive corporate response to employee facing serious family crisis, demonstrating company commitment to protecting workforce against external threats that could compromise professional environment or individual well-being. 2 years after initial court decision, I received official notification that Helena had been court ordered to undergo comprehensive psychiatric evaluation after multiple violations of restraining order that resulted in formal criminal charges, requiring judicial review of her mental competency and potential need for institutional treatment. Dr. Patricia was consulted as expert witness to provide professional opinion about whether Helena's behavioral pattern constituted ongoing danger to public safety that might require long-term psychiatric monitoring or additional restrictions on her freedom to contact former victims of harassment campaigns. The evaluation process revealed formal diagnosis of multiple personality disorders, including severe narcissistic personality disorder combined with obsessive compulsive tendencies that manifested through pathological inability to accept autonomy of adult offspring and through escalating control behaviors that included systematic criminal activity when traditional manipulation methods failed to achieve desired compliance. Court mandated therapy for Helena included specific conditions requiring her to explicitly acknowledge that her behavior had constituted criminal harassment, demonstrate concrete understanding of legal boundaries established through restraining order, and mainly develop healthy coping mechanisms for managing emotional distress related to loss of control over adult children without resorting to criminal methods of surveillance or harassment. Regular progress reports from her therapist indicated slow improvement in her ability to recognize inappropriate nature of her previous actions, but also suggested that underlying personality disorders required intensive, long-term treatment before she could be considered safe for unrestricted social interaction. The therapeutic process also revealed that Helena's obsession with controlling my life had been manifestation of a broader pattern of excessive control that had affected other relationships throughout her life, indicating that professional intervention had been necessary not only for protecting me, but also for addressing underlying psychological pathology that posed potential threat to others. Carla and I married in intimate ceremony 2.5 years after court decision, celebrating not only our love commitment but also symbolic victory of healthy relationship that survived systematic attempt at destruction through malicious family interference. Wedding ceremony was attended by close friends and supportive colleagues who had witnessed our struggle against maternal persecution and who celebrated our resilience through continuing to build positive life, despite external pressures designed to undermine emotional stability and professional success. Helena's absence from wedding ceremony was not source of sadness, but rather confirmation that toxic family patterns had been successfully eliminated from our relationship through courage to seek legal protection when necessary and commitment to maintaining healthy boundaries regardless of cultural pressures toward unconditional family reconciliation. Professional therapy sessions gradually transitioned from crisis management to long-term personal growth as I developed greater confidence in my ability to identify and respond appropriately to manipulative behavior in any relationship context, whether family, professional, or romantic. Dr. Patricia helped me understand that experience with Helena, while traumatic, had provided valuable lessons about importance of maintaining personal boundaries, recognizing warning signs of controlling behavior early, and mainly developing assertiveness skills that would protect me against future attempts at psychological manipulation by anyone who attempted to exploit cultural assumptions about obligation to tolerate abuse from family members. Therapy also addressed residual guilt feelings that occasionally surfaced when meaning people questioned my decision to cut contact completely with biological mother, helping me maintain confidence that legal protective measures had been appropriate response to criminal behavior regardless of family relationship involved. Roberto continued serving as close friend and professional resource, helping me navigate occasional social situations where people unfamiliar with full situation expressed surprise or disapproval about my estrangement from Helena without understanding criminal context that had necessitated legal intervention to protect basic safety and well-being. His continued friendship demonstrated importance of maintaining supportive relationships that provide validation when societal pressure encourages victims to reconcile with abusers based upon cultural family obligation rather than objective assessment of practical safety considerations. Through ongoing friendship, I learned to appreciate profound difference between people who respect personal autonomy and those who attempt to manipulate through emotional coercion, disguised as care or legitimate concern. 5 years after initial court decision, I received official notification that Helena had attempted to petition court for modification of restraining order, claiming complete rehabilitation through years of mandatory therapy and expressing desire for limited supervised contact with me for purposes of healthy family reconciliation. Court review of her petition included extensive evaluation of therapy progress, assessment of potential ongoing risk to my safety and well-being, and mainly consideration of my explicit statement that I had no desire for any form of contact regardless of her supposed psychological improvement. Legal representation provided by Carla successfully argued that Helena's historical pattern of escalating manipulation, followed by temporary apparent compliance, did not provide sufficient evidence of genuine personality change that would justify modification of protective measures that had proven effective in ensuring my safety and stability. For multiple years, current life with Carla in our comfortable apartment, surrounded by genuine friends and respectful colleagues, represents complete healing from trauma inflicted through years of family dysfunction, culminating in systematic criminal persecution that required legal intervention for effective resolution. Professional career continued flourishing through consistently high performance that clearly demonstrated Helena's allegations about mental instability had been malicious character assassination rather than legitimate assessment of workplace competency. Relationship with Carla deepened through shared experience of overcoming external threat to our happiness and commitment to supporting each other through life challenges without resorting to toxic patterns of control or manipulation that characterize unhealthy family dynamics. Reflection upon entire experience produces profound gratitude for legal system that protected victim of family abuse through appropriate judicial intervention, professional network that provided support when personal life was under systematic attack, and mainly for inner strength that allowed me to recognize toxic relationship patterns and take decisive action to protect long-term well-being despite cultural pressure to maintain family connection regardless of psychological cost. Story of my experience with Helena serves as important reminder that authentic love respects boundaries and supports autonomy, while manipulation disguised as care attempts to control through privacy violation, emotional coercion, and ultimately criminal behavior when other methods fail to achieve desired dominance. Legal victory represented not only personal protection, but also societal affirmation that adults have fundamental right to autonomy in relationships, including freedom to establish healthy boundaries with family members who demonstrate inability to respect basic dignity and legal rights of other human beings, regardless of claimed biological connection. If you enjoyed Felipe's story, then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you here on the screen. Click there, and I'll wait for you.